lag. This thing. So need to remember how I got rid of that. Was it? Plug these into here. What is that lag or echo? What is that lag or echo? Check. I understand where that lag and echo is coming from. Check. I'm running on my coffee room, I think. Saw something about this. Canada First Home Investment Tax Bill. Second, just got rid of the echo. Just got rid of the echo. It did not. What about now? Hey, got rid of the echo. Fantastic. Perfect. Get this primitive stuff I'm doing. Grinding up my coffee. Yeah. Money coming fast, so I don't need no lesson. Money going last, gotta do a lot of investing. Remember in the past when I did a lot of stressing. Now I got this cash from American Expressing. Why they second guessing? I just be collecting these expensive lessons in tennis and visiting my dentist. Yeah, my girl and I be doing calisthenics. We be eating all the best shit. These festivals look aesthetic. How you treat yourself pathetic. Yeah. Money coming fast, so I don't need no lesson. Money going last, gotta do a lot of investing. Remember in the past when I did a lot of stressing. Now I got this cash from American Expressing. Why they second guessing? I just be collecting these expensive lessons in tennis and visiting my dentist. Yeah, my girl and I be doing calisthenics. We be eating all the best shit. These festivals look aesthetic. How you treat yourself pathetic. Yeah. Money coming fast, so I don't need no lesson. Money gon' last, cause I do a lot investing. Remember in the past when I did a lot of stressing. Now I got this cash from American Expressing. Why they second guessing? I just be collecting these expensive lessons in tennis and visiting my dentist. Yeah, my girl and I be doing calisthenics. We be eating all the best shit. These festivals look aesthetic. How you treat yourself, yeah, money coming fast, so I don't need no lesson. Money gon' last, cause I do a lot of investing. Remember in the past when I did a lot of stressing. Now I got this cash from American Expressing. Why they second guessing? I just be collecting these expensive lessons in tennis and visiting my dentist. Yeah, my girl and I be doing calisthenics. We be eating all the best shit. These festivals look aesthetic. How you treat yourself pathetic. Coffee is brewing, people. I just heard about this Pierre Polyev Canada reinvestment thing you mentioned. Yeah. I don't know how I feel about him as a candidate, to be honest. Contenders disproportionately favors high-income individuals and corporations who are more likely to have significant capital gains. To say it's less helpful for the average Canadian struggle with the cost of living issues. We don't typically deal in asset sales. Uncertainty. The person who deliver the promise, boom. If reinvestment doesn't lead to substantial growth, or if people just shuffle money around to dodge taxes, the deferred revenue might never materialize. There's also a debate about whether it genuinely addresses housing shortages. Yeah, I could definitely see the argument that it doesn't particularly address the housing shortage. Definitely think it would be exploited. That all seems right to me. But I do think that Canada as a whole needs to create a more fertile ground for businesses. I totally agree with that. What arguments have they? What basis is there? What basis or dimensions of accuracy? Basis dimensions of arguments from Mark Kearney's proposed stated. That's a horribly worded question. What am I trying to actually ask him? Mark Kearney stated it is Government isn't a business. Shouldn't need revenue. Although maybe it is a business. Maybe that's the issue. They aren't run like a business, in my opinion. What is Canada's like debt to GDP ratio? It's crazy. Also, saw some number. Probably have said they've grown. Our GDP has grown 1.4% over the last decade with the Liberals of power, which I don't know if that number's true, but that was crazy to hear. I was like, what? Because here's the thing, I mean, the world, that's how the world works. Whether or not you think it's right or wrong, it's not really a decision that was made, it's more of like a force of nature, gravity. And you cannot fight gravity. So, as a country, we need to make more. Currency ties us to the broader economic uncertainty like the potential U.S. tariffs. Prudence. Yes, I'm sure my Kanye loves prudence. He's like a very prudent guy. What? EU urged citizens to stockpile supplies. This reports from Sky News and Fortune. The EU has urged 450 million citizens to stockpile 3 days' worth of essential supplies, including food, water, and medicine. Rising what? Potential crisis amid rising global tension and threats. Regulation comes in response to an increasingly volatile global landscape with interconnected threats ranging from cyber attacks and climate change to disease outbreaks and geopolitical tensions. Scientists consider leaving the U.S. From Nature, a study 75% of U.S. scientists surveyed are considered leaving the country amid research funding cuts in the Trump administration. Eye-opening opportunity. Yeah, that's hilarious. I was like, we're not gonna pay you anymore. I was like, what? I'm gonna get a job. That coffee should be ready. I'll be right back. Hypersonic flow chaos. Trump praises the Canadian piano. Trump vacation piano. What's this? Am I finna read something? Yeah. The Child in the Shadow. Ursula. What is this? Speculative fiction. Mm. I hear the birds chirping. Beautiful. Fabulous. Fabulist? No, I thought it was fabulous. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Source far said it typically features of animals and inanimate objects like human-like characteristics that convey a moral lesson. I like that. Keep that. Part of Anderson's cruelty is the cruelty of reason, of psychological realism, radical honesty, and the willingness to see and accept the consequences of an act or a failure to act. There is a sadistic, what does sadistic mean as well? There's sadistic. When I think of sadistic, I think of like cruelty or like a certain level of like pervertedness, but I don't actually know. Yeah, pleasure often from cruel or malicious kind, from causing pain, suffering, and humiliation to others. The term comes from Marquis de Sade. There's a sadistic, depressive streak in Anderson. Also, which is his shadow. It's there, it's part of him, but not all of him, nor is he ruled by it. His strength, his subtlety, and creative genius come precisely from his acceptance of and cooperation with the dark side of the soul. That's why Anderson is a why Anderson the fabulist is one of the greatest realists of literature. And we stand here, like the princess herself, and tell you what the story of the shadow means to me at age 45. But what did it mean to me when I first read it at age 10 or 11? What does it mean to children? Do they understand it? Is it good for them? This bitter, complex study of a moral failure? I don't know. I hated it when I was a kid. I hated all the Anderson stories with unhappy endings. That didn't stop me from reading them and rereading them, or from me remembering them. So that after a gap of 30 years, when I was pondering this talk, a little voice suddenly said inside my left ear, "You'd better dig out that Anderson story you know about the shadow." At age 10, I certainly wouldn't have gone on about reason and repression and all of that. I had no critical equipment, no detachment, and even less power of sustained thought than I have now. I like this sentence. I had somewhat less conscious mind than I have now, but I had as much or more of an unconscious mind, and that was perhaps in better touch with it than I am now. And it was that too, that the unknown depths in me, that story spoke. And it was the depths at which responded to it non-verbally, irrationally, and understood it and learned from it. Jung's terminology is notoriously difficult as he kept changing meanings the way a growing tree changes leaves. We'll try to define a few of the key terms in an amateurish way without totally misrepresenting them. Very roughly, then, Jung saw the ego, what we usually call the self, as only a part of the self, the part of which we are consciously aware of. The ego revolves around the self as the earth, the sun. The ego revolves around the self as the earth around the sun. So the sun, the self is transcendent, much larger than the ego. It's not a private possession, but a collective. Mystical, but it's also exact and practical. We're fundamentally alike. We all have the same general tendencies and configurations in our psyche. The ego, the little private individual consciousness, knows this, and it knows that if it's not to be trapped in the hopeless silence of autism, it must identify with something outside of itself, beyond itself, larger than itself. What is, I don't explain the sentence. Are you familiar with Ursula Le Guin's Charm? And my hips hurt. I gotta stretch. I was sitting in this chair a long time yesterday. Explain the particularly this. The ego, the little private individual consciousness knows this. Gwyn is talking about the ego, the part of the self, part of you that says I am me, your personal senses of self. She calls it little and private to emphasize its limited scope compared to the vastness of the unconscious mind, a Jungian idea she's riffing on. The noses part refers to the awareness the ego has, likely about its own fragility and isolation, which she says, building up to in the essay, and it knows that if it's not to be trapped in the silence of autism, here's where it gets tricky. The ego understands that without some connection, it risks being stuck in a state Le Guin describes as the hopelessness silence of autism. She's using autism metaphorically, not clinically. In 1975, when she wrote this, autism was less understood than today, often popularly seen as a condition of extreme withdrawal or an inability to connect with others. Think of it as a cultural shorthand rather than a precise diagnosis. The silence suggests a lack of communication or relationship with the outside world, and hopeless adds a layer of despair like being locked. Okay. Um, if it's weak or if it's offered nothing better, what it does is identify with the collective consciousness. That is Jung's term for kind of lowest common denominator of all the little egos added together. The mass mind, which consists of such things as cults, creeds, fads, fashions, status seeking, and conventions received, beliefs, advertising, pop cults, all the isms, all the ideologies, all the hollow forms of communication and togetherness that lack real communion or real sharing. Um, the ego, accepting these empty forms, becomes a member of the lonely crowd. To avoid this, to attain real community, it must turn inward and away from the crowd to the source. It must identify with its own deeper regions, the great unexplored regions of the self. These religions of the psyche Jung calls the collective unconscious, and it is in them where we all meet that he sees the source of true community, of felt religion, of art, grace, spontaneity, and love. How do you get there? How do you find your own private entrance to the collective unconscious? Well, the first step is often the most important, and Jung says the first step is to turn around and follow your own shadow. Jung saw the psyche as it populated with a group of fascinating figures, much livelier than Freud's grim trio of ID, ego, and superego. They're all worth meeting. The ones we're concerned with, the one we're concerned with is the shadow. The shadow is the other side of the psyche. It is Cain, it is Caliban, Mr. Hyde, it is Virgil who guided Dante through hell, Gilgamesh's friend, Enkidu, Frodo's enemy Gollum, it is the doppelganger, it is Mowgli's great brother, the werewolf, the wolf, the bear, the tiger of a thousand folk tales. It is the serpent Lucifer. The shadow stands on the threshold between the conscious and the unconscious mind, and we meet it in our dreams as sisters, brother, friend, beast, monster, enemy, and guide. Totally gonna sneeze there. The shadow stands on the threshold between the conscious and the unconscious mind, and we meet in our dreams. Okay. Okay, the shadow. Unless it is embodied in the individual conscious life, the blacker and denser it is, the less you look at it. In other words, the stronger it grows until it becomes a menace, an intolerable load, and a threat to the soul. Unadmitted to consciousness, the shadow is projected outward onto others. There's nothing wrong with me, it's them. I'm not a monster, other people are monsters. All foreigners are evil, all communists are evil, all capitalists are evil. It is the cat that made me kick him, mommy. Alright, now she's talking about. I like that essay, it's interesting. Download that. That was cool. Glad I read that. Yeah, okay. I'm kind of getting a little bit off track, although I am looking at some of the stuff that I was kind of looking at with respect to the app, so I'm gonna get back to that. Cursor, pull up cursor, put that there. You can quickly pull up the app and rinse the washer and stretch a little bit. I'm getting here for a little shift. Oh, so I want to node. I don't have any npm in here because I kind of made all this myself, right? Script test. PX, just note that here we are. This get away. First was work was one of my favorite reads in my teenage years. He opened me up to the world of fantasy novels. The Left Hand of Darkness was difficult to read at the time, but I greatly appreciate it in the later years. I wish he had written more. I was shocked if I listened to a story by probably the best psycho horror I know. Fetch story. There we go. Does it take me to it? That's perfect. I love that. Story. Refresh the page. I should probably add a button to reset the search bar. But yeah, that's where we're at. For anybody that didn't watch yesterday's live stream, I think basically the idea is, I think it'd be interesting to essentially make like a bookshelf and my own private bookshelf of interesting hacker news stories that I liked. And I'm pinging the API, doing a get request, and getting these stories. If I just click on this, it just takes me to it. This also just takes me to it. That's cool. I almost want to put. Yeah, anyways. The idea is scrape hacker news, try to understand what are the popular stories that are happening right now, and see if we can create some sort of trend analysis of like, hey, what are the memes that are circulating right now? And then I think the idea would be like, how can you use, I think clay is an option that I'm definitely exploring, and this is kind of what first introduced me to the idea because I am looking at applying for a job there. And so I likely would, if I was cleaning up this tool, I would probably end up using them as the database instead of a JSON file. But yeah, the idea would be have that monitor for popular stories and then create like Giphies or memes that you can use to then, market to certain communities. That's sort of the idea. Yeah. So I'm gonna leave. I'm gonna throw in some tunes, and then I'm gonna take a few minutes.
We like to make you cry. So then you wonder why. Look up in the sky. Our powers is very high. We are number one, and only just begun in being number one. Flash is coming on. We'll even make you wonder how Flash got all the thunder. We like to make you cry. So then you'll wonder why. Is it that we are special? Or do you believe in gifts? We're moving on the one, and only just begun. In being number one. Flash is growing strong. We like to make you cry. So then you'll wonder why. Look up in the sky. Our powers is very high. We like to make you cry. So then you'll wonder why. Look up in the sky. Our powers is very high. We are number one, and only just begun in being number one. Flash is coming on. We'll even make you wonder how Flash got all the thunder. We like to make you cry. So then you'll wonder why. Is it that we are special?
Never throw dirt, you lose ground. My doggy just pulled up with the herb, yeah, we smoke it by the pound. Keep it peaceful, what goes around, come back around. Listen when your elder's speaking. It ain't a good deal if you don't need it. You only get what you need, not what you want. I'm trying to find meaning, I was once lost. I did my time bleeding, now I'm more dog. The bounty hunter, chasing all these commas. My favorite season, summer. I love to thank my mama and my father for teaching how to let your thoughts wander. And the value of some clean water. I keep it cool, I be just like water. Never throw dirt, you lose ground. My doggy just pulled up with the herb, yeah, we smoke it by the pound. Keep it peaceful, what goes around, come back around. Listen when your elder's speaking. It ain't a good deal if you don't need it. You only get what you need, not what you want. I'm trying to find meaning, I was once lost. I did my time bleeding, now I'm more dog. The bounty hunter, chasing all these commas. My favorite season, summer. I love to thank my mama and my father for teaching how to let your thoughts wander. And the value of some clean water. I keep it cool, I be just like water. My favorite songs ever made right there. One of my favorite songs I've ever made. My little baby's love language acts of service. I remember first dates, I was burning like a furnace. Brought my little brother, I was so fucking nervous. Now look at us 3 years later, we still working. Took some bumps and bruises, but we still learning. Every day a new chapter, page turning. Every scar gon' get healed, we sage burning. You don't ever gotta be sorry for what you feel is perfect. I hope you see that every day I'm moving with a purpose. I hope you see that everything is gonna be worth it. I hope you see that all little babies are gonna be so fucking perfect. I hope you see everything that you wanna see. You earned it. You earned it. You earned it. Love you, baby. Yeah. You earned it. Yeah. You earned it. You my Valentine. I promise one day I'm gonna make it shine. Put some boogers on your neck. Yeah. You earned it. You my Valentine. And you gon' age just like a fine wine. You're my greatest flex. Yeah. You earned it. You my Valentine. I'ma get you a property to design and then give you the check. Yeah, you earned it, you my Valentine. And you a queen in this heart skyline and nothing less. Happy Valentine's, baby. Love you, booby. My little baby's love language acts of service. I remember first dates, I was burning like a furnace. Brought my little brother, I was so fucking nervous. Now look at us 3 years later, we still working. Took some bumps and bruises, but we still learning. Every day a new chapter, page turning. Every scar gon' get healed, we sage burning. You don't ever gotta be sorry for what you feel is perfect. I hope you see that every day I'm moving with a purpose. I hope you see that everything is gonna be worth it. I hope you see that all little babies are gonna be so fucking perfect. I hope you see everything that you wanna see. You earned it. You earned it. You earned it. Love you, baby. Yeah. You earned it. Yeah. You earned it. You my Valentine. I promise one day I'm gonna make it shine. Put some boogers on your neck. Yeah. You earned it. You my Valentine. And you gon' age just like a fine wine. You're my greatest flex. Yeah. You earned it. You my Valentine. I'ma get you a property to design and then give you the check. Yeah, you earned it, you my Valentine. And you a queen. Anyways. Close that down. We're gonna leave this on because we're already using parts of that. Did I have I thought did I use to do that search? I think I used Grok. Did I use Grok for that? Quick and simple editor for cron schedule expressions by chronometer. Okay, the order may set up long aggregation, create metrics from logs, create alerts from metrics, ignore all the false alarms, build to add another dashboard using chronometer. Create a chronometer. Chronometer, create a quick and simple editor for cron schedule expressions by chronometer. What did I write here? Okay, so da 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 da. How good is this agent thing? Yay! Mm.
Cron tab. It is a great way to set up for applications and scripts to run at certain times, days, months, whenever you want it to run. But even though the syntax seems fairly simple when you first look at it, when you actually go to do something like if you want something to run every 5 minutes or every other day or something like that, it could get complicated. Well, here is how I go about generating my commands for my cron tab file. Here is a great website I have used for years. crontab-generator.org. Now, if you set cron jobs using cron tab, which is basically a way to get programs to run at certain times and days based on when you want them to run, it seems simple, but it's also complicated and sometimes a little hard to wrap your head around. It is so easy to use this website. So let's say I have a program that I want to run every day at 1:34 a.m., right? So I come down here is I can have it run every minute, every even minute, odd minutes, every 5 minutes, but I want it to run at what did I say? I'll say 34 after, we'll say 1 a.m. and I want to do it every day, every month, every day of the week. And then down here I give it the command. Let's say it's a backup, right? You should give it the full path is the proper way to do this. It gives you some examples here if you want to run a PHP or dump a MySQL database or run a wget thing. But we're just going to put the command in there. And then down here, do you want to execute and mute the output? That way if there's an error, it doesn't put it anywhere. Or you can have it save it to a file or email it to you. Then you click generate and you put this in your cron tab. So we'll copy that. We'll go to our shell. That's not our shell. This is our shell. Cron tab-e. And then we'll go down to the bottom. You can see I have a few things in here. And I would just add that line. And now, every day at 1:34 a.m., it's shell. That's not our shell. This is our shell. So we'll copy. Then you use an error. It doesn't put it anywhere. Or you can have it save it to a file or email it to you. Then you click generate and you put this in your cron tab. So we'll copy that. We'll go to our shell. That's not our shell. This is our shell. Cron tab-e. And then we'll go down to the bottom. You can see I have a few things in here. And I would just add that line. And now, every day at 1:34 a.m., it's going to run my backup script. Let's not save that. Let's look at another example. Let's say you want something to run on the first of every month. Well, when do you want it to run? Do you you don't want it to run every minute, we'll say run at, let's say, 8 a.m. So right at 8 a.m. Or you can say 3 minutes after. We'll say right at 8 a.m. And we will say run it on every month, or maybe we want to do even months. And let's say we want to actually run only during the week, right? So maybe we're going to do a backup every morning before business starts, and we want to run only on days that we're there because nothing's happening on the weekend. So our last backup would be on Friday. Here we're saying even months. We'll say every month though. So, because that's more logical, right? So we're going to run this. No, we're going to run at 8 a.m. first minute every day, every month, but only Monday through Friday. That's our command. We will continue, and now you can see it's running at 8 a.m. and it's running days 1 through.
Yeah. All right. So, this is what I was going to do with clay. Trending definition. So, I think basically the story is trending if within the last 30 minutes post consistently gained at least one vote, upvote per minute for a new comment. Comment's a little bit more invested. Every 3 minutes. Trending stories can be no older than 7 days. I guess that doesn't really measure virality super close. It would say 30 days. Yeah, I'd say 3 days. Metrics for that would be like metrics. So we'd have like velocity of points, velocity of points, votes rather, votes, velocity of comment page, like must be 36 hours. So like comments divided by minutes. Are you supposed to put that extra? No. I don't know what the correct way of putting that would be. Um, a new comment every 30 minutes, so 0.33 comments per min. That's 30 minutes. Velocity votes will just be like, I don't know how you represent delta. 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 Votes. Delta minutes is going to be greater than or equal to 1 vote per minute equals 30. Begin or over? I feel like I'm not formally defining that properly with these things here, but looking at it, I think I understand. Mm. Okay, so with this formally defined, chat GPT, creative coding logic. Okay, I am building a web app super simply. TypeScript, HTML, HTML, blah blah. Yeah, I don't even know. Building a web app. I want to scrape Hacker News's Hacker News API. Choose to see trending topics or discussions. Building, maybe I'll actually just put this thing. All right. npm install SQLite to read SQLite 3. Create a file called database.js and add the following code to set up your database table. Const SQLite 3 require verbose const db database trending db return this. Create a table for hackernews storage, serialize, run the script. Node.js. Back in your terminal, run the script to initialize the database. Next step. Inserting and querying. Once your database is set up, you can build functions to insert, to update, and query stories. For instance, to insert a story, you can build some functions for updates. Okay. This seems pretty straightforward. Cool. Let's give that a try. Alright. Close it down. And we're going to do npm I SQLite 3. This function has been moved to npm CLIFS. The file. It's interesting that it moved that way. But okay. Is that like the right SQLite? Okay, I guess it's kind of nice I didn't have to get it on my 3 is C library. Fetch results from SQL queries. We'll need to use a database cursor. Call con cursor to create a cursor. What is it called? SQL 3 node documentation. Was I supposed to do SQL 3? Maybe I should. Okay. Create file database and add the following code to set up your database and table. Cons require this. I wonder if this thing can actually help with this. Really just wish it could take the whole context, everything. Folders. Really just. That's Travis Cursor rules, code base. Yeah. Up to this point, I've used a JSON file to store the bookmarks. I'd like to move it to a database. I have npm installed SQLite 3. Now I need to set up my database. And create a table for hackernews. I need to set up my database and create a table for hacker news stories, of which I will be polling the API. Yeah. Yay! Okay, so first things we want to do, yeah, that makes sense. We're going to set up a db.ts. In there, we're going to do import SQLite. Doing that. And then create this connection. Okay, so import SQLite. Initialize the database. This similar idea. Why does this one look like more? So I don't really know why I want to do this. What? This is bullshit. Maybe in the migrate. Is this a TS link thing? Module not found. Oh my gosh. Did I export it properly? Oh, this should not get it. Except file, yeah. Export function add bookmark, get bookmarks, and initialize. Except file, brother. How many times I gotta accept a file, brother? Okay, import initialize db, add bookmark, and get. Do I need to add this shit to the migrate file for real? No, 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 no. Import initialize database, add bookmark. Okay. And if I go what? TS stupid. Okay, so that seems oh, Paul Graham got a new essay out. Tight. Wow, that's awesome. Okay, sweet. So it actually seems like that worked. That isn't coming from my. Yeah, let's do some cleaning up here. Move that to the trash. Da, 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 da. The next one. Move that to trash. Delete. Go here and say, um, hmm, that could. Why are node modules in here then? Okay. Anyways. Except, what's your database set up? You can build functions to insert, update, and query trending stories. For instance, to insert a story. It says, sorry, Hacker News ID, title, URL, uploads, comments. Consequently, insert into stories, Hacker News ID, title, values, this. Um, let's get more detailed. Okay, the database is set up and migrated. I have confirmed it works. That set up to start getting into the implementation. I haven't done this before, so like some hand holding and sort of teacher mentality. to step 5 in your previous output. So have it inserted. I actually think I should watch this project take off. I'm pretty sure this guy has like a cursor. Da, 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 da. Mm, 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 mm. Mm, mm. Do exactly. Agents building apps with the O1 Pro template system. Part 1 to 2 workshop series. Part 2 advanced workflow that builds up. Yeah, agents for some coders. Cursor. Where's like the cursor rules and stuff like that? Back in setup, auth, setup, git workflow. Can you help complexity? Fair. Da, 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 da. Navigating the UI, cursor ignore project rules, recommended rules for this. Da, da, da. Yeah, this is a 4-hour course, but man, I don't really want to do that. Recommended settings, recommended models, installation, sign up, navigating the UI, cursor ignore, a guide to the cursor's rule system. Yeah, this is probably worth exploring. Let's check out this.
The way that all of the context management and stuff happens kind of behind the scenes on Cursor, right? The reason why you're able to type a message into the chat box here, ask a question about your codebase and get an answer is because under the hood, Cursor does codebase indexing. So one of the ways that you can have some control over this process and have some control over what Cursor actually indexes out of all of your files over here is by using a file called .cursorignore. So what you will want to do is you will want to create a new file, .cursorignore. What this is going to do is this is going to give you very granular control over what Cursor can index and what it can't. So we mentioned this in the settings section, but if we go back to our settings really quick, go to the features tab, and if you scroll down to codebase indexing here, you'll see that we have some settings around codebase indexing. So what Cursor does under the hood is they use embeddings, this improves codebase wide answers. You can see there's like a little explanation here. And what happens here is this is basically the system, and we'll avoid going into the technical details on what indexing means and what they're doing with their retrieval system. Basically, this is the system that's determining how relevant a file is, if it should be included in the context of your request to Cursor, all that kind of stuff. So if we actually expand settings here, you're going to see we have a little bit of control over here. So let's talk about some of the settings that I recommend here, and we'll go a little bit more in depth on Cursor ignore. One thing to note, this is pretty advanced. So if you're a beginner beginner and you're a little overwhelmed here, honestly, I would just recommend you skip this. If you're a beginner, there's almost no use case where you're actually going to want control over this. The people who are going to want control over this are mostly going to be experienced developers, particularly experienced developers in real-world software teams who want more fine-grained control over the code bases. The reason they're going to want control, if you want control over this and you're kind of somebody that fits that persona, because your code bases are going to be many hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of tokens of context, where most beginners are going to have projects that typically will fit in the context window of most of the current models. So they're not really going to need to manage that, but the people who are managing really large code bases probably want some control over this. Okay, so let's talk about the indexing settings here. So you can see, Cursor gives you the ability to delete your index or resync your index. So what can happen is sometimes your code base can actually get out of sync. Sometimes you'll notice this actually isn't 100%. So you're able to kind of just click this, it'll resync everything. And so you have a little bit of control over that process. Cursor does index behind the scenes automatically, so you don't need to ever really come in here. The only time you'll ever want to come in here is if maybe you make a pretty massive code base change or something, and maybe you pull a crazy amount of code and you notice you're getting some errors in your results, or maybe things just seem a little off. Sometimes it can be code base indexing errors. This is pretty uncommon. They've kind of stamped out most of those issues by now. Back in the day, this used to come up sometimes, and so we would kind of teach people to come here and hit the resync button. You'll almost never need to do that these days, but it's something that's kind of worth noting at the very least. You definitely want to index new folders by default. This just means anytime you create a new folder or a new file over here, it's basically just going to automatically be included in the index, right? Which is, it's much better to default in indexing and opt out specifically via something like cursor ignore than
New mouse pad, who dis? It's interesting. Some more tea is on the kettle. Need to charge my phone too. Great. Great. Presume we're gonna get this. Okay. Anyway, sorry team, I got excited. I got this new key mouse pad. Oh yeah, that's gonna be fire. You can tell.
most beginners are going to have projects that typically will fit in the context window of most of the current models. So they're not really going to need to manage that, but the people who are managing really large code bases probably want some control over this. Okay, so let's talk about the indexing settings here. So you can see, Cursor gives you the ability to delete your index or resync your index. So what can happen is sometimes your code base can actually get out of sync. Sometimes you'll notice this actually isn't 100%. So you're able to kind of just click this, it'll resync everything, and so you have a little bit of control over that process. Cursor does index behind the scenes automatically, so you don't like need to ever really come in here. The only time you'll ever want to come in here is if maybe you make a pretty massive code base change or something, and maybe you pull a crazy amount of code and you notice you're getting some errors in your results, or maybe things just seem a little off. Sometimes that can be code base indexing errors. This is pretty uncommon. They've kind of stamped out most of those issues by now. Back in the day, this used to come up sometimes, and so we would kind of teach people to come here and hit the resync button. You'll almost never need to do that these days, but it's something that's kind of worth noting at the very least. You definitely want to index new folders by default. This just means anytime you create a new folder, a new file over here, it's basically just going to automatically be included in the index.
Okay. Yeah. This guy said this might not be useful, but that's fine. Cursor settings. Kind of should load this now. I can fix that as well. Rules. Don't give me high level stuff asked for. Project rules. Project. Is that where we're at? This is in features. Features, powerful co-pilot replacement that can suggest changes across this. First accepts chat. The settings. Index new by this. Ignore files. Configure ignore files. Git, graph relationships, default docs. Okay.
Right, which is it's much better to default in indexing and opt out specifically via something like cursor ignore than the reverse, right? It's just much easier to manage. So one of the things that you can do, of course, is you can jump into the cursor ignore file. The nice thing about settings is it gives you the ability to click directly into there. So let's open this tab back up. And then git graph file relationships, you're just going to want to keep this to be default. Don't change this. This is really going to mess things up sometimes if you disable that. So highly recommend you just keep that default as enabled. But let's actually talk about the cursor ignore settings. Okay, so cursor ignore is a file format that's very similar to git ignore. So again, if you're a beginner and you're feeling a little bit lost, this is totally normal. Cursor does have docs on their ignore feature, which is actually really helpful. I highly recommend reading this. We'll include this in the lesson links below. But the gist of cursor ignore is it works exactly like a git ignore works. So kind of the TLDR on git ignore is one of the things when you're working with Git repositories and version control is you'll typically want to define patterns of files and folders that you want to exclude from committing to your codebase. A really popular use case for this is you want to exclude, for example, environment variable files that have very sensitive kind of API keys and things like that, right? You don't want to push inadvertently your local environment variables to a production code base, and then maybe it's public and then suddenly keys get exposed, things like that. The same principles with git ignore are applied to cursor ignore. So by default, cursor actually adheres to all of the rules of git ignore, which is really helpful. What this means is, say you're hiding your environment variables in your git ignore, well, cursor ignore is going to respect those rules and by default not index your environment variables, right? So what would happen is maybe you would ask a question like, hey, what's my API key in here? And what would happen is you wouldn't get an answer for that because that file wasn't indexed. And so what cursor ignore does, or dot cursor ignore, it's very important to get that dot. Sometimes I've seen people forget the dot, and what happens is they're confused why it's not working, and it's literally just because they forgot the dot. So if we were to do something like, say in our public folder here, we were just to have a hello.txt, and I just said like, might actually want this or something. What we could do here is we could be like, okay, we don't actually want this file to be indexed. So what is this is going to, as the basic is here going to be, is one of the things my migration files to still be committed to Git, but then I'll jump into my Git ignore, and all those nasty, SQL migration files or whatever won't actually get indexed by cursor up an old migration file months ago. So that's like a typical use case for cursor ignore. So again, a little bit of an advanced feature, but it is something that's very helpful, particularly for those of you who work with. Cursor has a feature called Rules for AI. If you jump into your settings here in the top right, you'll see that we mentioned this in settings. We skip this. We're finally coming back to it, right? Which is this big text box here that is Rules for AI. So one of the things that's important to understand about the way that cursor rules work in general across the application is there are kind of two layers of rules. There are the app-wide rules, which is what rules for AI are, and there are the project-specific rules, which is what the .cursor rules lesson and the project rules sections will cover. So let's talk about for now the app-wide rules. So the way that rules for AI works is all of the rules that are in this text box here in your settings, these rules are going to get applied to every single request the cursor makes, whether you use it with chat, whether you use it with Composer, right? What's going to happen is this text here, so anything that you have in this text area is actually going to get injected near the start of your prompt. So say I'm going to actually cut these features yet, so don't worry if you feel lost about this. I'm just doing an example here, but I'm basically just tagging this file and saying, what does this do? And this, because we have no rules for AI, this is just going to be kind of the default cursor experience. So you're basically not doing any prompting on the request. You're just taking the model. 10 different projects are going to get applied to the actual specific, that where you could have 10 general, right? Because these are going to be applied to every single project. Like say you're working in one project that's TypeScript based, you have one project that's Python based. Well, your rules for AI, you're probably not going to want to have, say Python specific rules because it may not be applicable to your TypeScript project, right? That actually might inject a prompt that's not optimal for that use case. And so you might want to actually do that type of rule in a project rule. So I'm going to go ahead and paste these rules back, and you'll see that these are the rules that I have currently. I will of course paste those down below in the text section of this lesson. These are rules that have circulated.
What
talked
are
about the general
rules here.
Cursor has a feature called Rules for AI. If you jump into your settings here in the top right, you'll see that we mentioned this in settings. We skip this. We're finally coming back to it, right? Which is this big text box here that is Rules for AI. So one of the things that's
go into Chat GPT, make these cursor rules better. Fantastic. Okay.
We talked about the general rules for AI, right? Those are the rules that apply to every single one of your projects, no matter what's open in Cursor. Now let's talk about your .cursor rules, which are the way that you apply project-specific goals to your various different projects. So the way that this is going to work is if we go back to Cursor, what we can do here is we can create a new file at the very root, the very kind of top level of our project. We want to call this .cursor rules. And what you can do here,
Got that right. Cursor rules.
is you can use this in the exact same way that you were using your rules for AI, except these rules are only going to be applied to the specific project. So one of the things you can do here is you can basically decide, okay, here's everything that the AI should have context about my project. Maybe, maybe you write a sentence or two about what the project is. Maybe you have some pieces of your tech stack that you're using that are very specific to your project. And a great example of this that I highly recommend you go check out is I have my McKay's app template. This is a very popular starting full stack app template. This is actually what I use myself for all of my new projects. Pretty awesome template. This is also kind of the same tech stack our app course is based on. So this, if you've kind of gone through that, that's going to look familiar to you. But one of the things that I have in this repository, and I'll make sure that I include this below, all the links for this, is you'll see this like 400, I think it's almost 500 lines now. Things getting pretty crazy. It's almost 500 lines of a cursor rules file here. So let's actually just copy this really quick. And I'm going to paste this in. You don't necessarily need to do this unless you want, but I just kind of want to show you an example of what really high quality cursor rules look like. So one of the things to note before we continue here is you'll notice if I go back to Cursor's rules for AI docs, which I highly recommend you go through and read, the backwards compatibility here is still included, but Cursor does say that they are planning on deprecating this for their new project rule system. So we're going to cover project rules in an upcoming lesson that will be available hopefully very soon, probably within 2 or 3 days of the original publication date of this. So most of you will probably have that by the time it's published. Make sure to check the feed in the changelog to make sure that you're seeing when that lesson goes live, because we will of course cover the new method that they're replacing it with. But it is worth noting that Cursor rules does in fact still work. We think this will probably go for a while, and obviously whenever they do deprecate this, we'll make sure to notify everybody so that you get your rules switched over. One of the nice things in some of our early development looking into the new rule system is that it's very easy to take your existing Cursor rules and apply them to the new system. So you won't have to worry about like wasting much work here for the new system. So let's actually jump back into that Cursor rules file and I'll kind of show you what I mean. So one of the things that you'll see here is I've actually structured my cursor rules for that particular template repo that I just pasted this from, or that I just copied from rather. We have a bunch of different sections. So one of the things is to kind of give some like really high level instructions. This overview is typically where I'll put like the overview of the project I'm working on. So obviously the template is just the template. So we're not really applying this to a particular project, but you can see I'm defining all sorts of things that are going to be really helpful context to the AI.
Okay. So yeah, let's get that. So project specification guidelines about that, write complete code, your goals, you can finish. Um This is a Group training times. Right. Yes. SQLite. Okay. Alright. Okay. We'll be running cron jobs hacker news API every 10 minutes. Da, 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 da. 10 minutes to monitor trending topics and discussions. Story is trending. Don't care about. Actually, maybe I do care. Metrics. Trending.
that's within Cursor, right? So in our case, we're using Cloud 3.5 Sonnet right now. So any calls to the API, to that model, and all the requests that we get back, we're going to inject all of these rules, right? So the way the prompts for this basically works, and I'm just going to use this as like a text editor, right? Is you have your cursor prompt. So this is going to be whatever internal prompt Cursor uses behind the scenes, and then you're going to kind of have your rules for AI. Right? So this is kind of the these are those rules that are applied to all your different projects. And then lastly, you're going to have your .cursor rules. Okay, so this is going to be your .cursor rules. So this is going to be your project specific rules. And then of course it's going to be whatever your user request is with whatever context Cursor comes up with. So this is kind of how the prompt hierarchy works. All right, so we're obviously right here. So that's kind of how that works. But you can see in this example prompt, right, we're defining this is how we want the AI to structure our project, right? So if we ask it, for example, if we use Composer and we say, hey, create a new file, it's going to have some context over like, okay, here's where I should probably put this new file, right? Say the new file is a new API route. Okay, well then the AI has context about where that particular file should go, right? And then we have things like general rules, rules for environment variables, rules for types, right? I use TypeScript in my starter repo. So here's how we want our types to be written and sorted. We even have things like example code. You'll see I have front-end rules. We have back-end rules, right? We have code examples of how I like my component structure, right? Pretty in depth. Highly recommend you kind of go through this because even if these rules aren't relevant to whatever your preferred tech stack is or whatever, you can kind of at least see like an example of how a really good cursor rules file is organized. This is something that I use actively in production in apps that I have that are like actually have real users and are like generating real revenue. This is like the exact same system I use, right? So I'm showing you here a very production grade system for cursor rules, and my best recommendation is to kind of study this. And one of the things that I mentioned was whenever Cursor decides they want to deprecate the current system and move it to the new one, what's going to happen is your project rules are probably going to move away from a super long single file to just a bunch of small ones. So what I'll probably just end up doing is creating, instead of just this giant file, I'll create a file just for my payments, right? So I have payments rules, boom, maybe I just copy that, paste it into a subdirectory that was like my payment rules, right? Same with backend. Instead of injecting my my backend rules into this gigantic file, maybe I'll just go cut those backend rules out and put them in a single file. So any of the kind of energy you spend, the time you spend investing into building out your cursor rules, it should be really easy eventually to migrate to the new system. So you don't have to worry about wasting time here. Your cursor rules are always going to be useful. It's just kind of the structure, the way Cursor is kind of going, which it seems like they're trying to push users to, is just going to change. And we'll make sure, of course, to have you covered in that respect. So these are cursor rules, again, just project level rules that differ from AI rules, whereas AI rules are app level rules. So we talked about .cursor rules, how this is kind of an existing paradigm within Cursor right now that you can use, but Cursor may be migrating to project rules in the future. So one of the things that we want to do with this lesson is we kind of want to prepare for that. We're going to kind of compare the .cursor rules way of doing rules for projects versus the new project rule system. We're going to talk about the new project rule system, why it matters, all that good stuff. So one of the ways that I'm approaching this practically at the time of recording this, which is going to be kind of early to mid-February of 2025, is I'm actually just doing both formats. So you'll see here I have my existing .cursor rules file, right? This is what we covered in the cursor rules lesson. And then we have the new format, which instead of being a singular file, you actually create a .cursor folder. And inside of that folder, you have another folder. Presumably, Cursor is going to do more with this in the future, which is why I'm guessing they have set this up this way. So you have a .cursor folder. Inside of that folder, you have a rules folder. And inside of that rules folder, you have a bunch of different rules files, rather. So you can see all of these files here with the .mdc format. These are all corresponding to my rules here. So each one of these rules, like let's click into the auth one, for example. You'll see, okay, we get this interesting looking UI here. What's going on? Why aren't we just getting a little text file here that we can edit? Okay, so what's happening here is the project rules have sort of three different parts. They have a description, they have a file pattern system, which we'll talk about in a second, and then in here you kind of have your traditional text area, right? So I can write in here, you can use Markdown format, you can even preview this in Markdown, pretty nice little system here. Rules from it, kind of the gist of it here. So all .cursor/rules folder is, I cut this, works, is project rules get fed to, so the way the project rules works, I pasted it in here, but we made one tweak. So the way the project rules works is project rules get fed to Composer agent. So one of the things that you'll see with Composer in its current state is you have normal mode, okay? Normal mode, this is what you'll see right here, edit code, add dimension, all that good stuff, and then agent mode, which you will see as